My husband's mistress had the nerve to crash our anniversary dinner, wearing the diamond bracelet he'd meant for me. She strolled in like she owned the place, flashing that smug little grin, clearly expecting me to fall apart right there in the restaurant. Instead, I reached into my purse and calmly pulled out a USB stick. "There's an infidelity clause in the prenup," I told her, keeping my voice even. "And my investigators got all the proof we need." Gavin's face turned ghostly pale. The waiters stopped what they were doing. Suddenly, they weren't just serving dinner. They were witnesses. A few hours earlier, I'd been standing in front of my mirror, sizing myself up in a midnight blue silk dress that fit like it had been sewn onto me. It was elegant, tailored to show just enough, and clung in all the right places. At 45, I still turned heads, though honestly, the only one I wanted to turn was Gavin's. Lately, even that felt like wishful thinking. Tonight was our 20th wedding anniversary, and I hadn't picked that dress by accident. It wasn't just classy, it was a statement. I deliberately avoided the red one Gavin had suggested earlier in the week. He liked it when I looked soft, a little fragile, something he could mold. "You look absolutely stunning, Mrs. Whitmore," Nora, our housekeeper, had said, leaning in from the doorway. "Thanks, Nora," I replied, fastening the diamond studs to my ears. My neck was still bare, waiting for the bracelet I'd found tucked into Gavin's desk drawer 3 weeks ago. He hadn't even bothered to hide it well. I'd been digging for something else entirely. Evidence. Before I go any further, let me just say, if stories like this one hit home for you, if you enjoy tales of smart women taking back power in the most satisfying ways, go ahead and subscribe. It's free, and it helps us keep telling stories about women who refuse to be underestimated. Back to that night. My hand trembled a little as I put on my lipstick. Not from nerves, but from that ice-cold, calculated fury that had been simmering for the last 6 months. I took a breath, steadied myself. Tonight, I needed control. And control had become second nature to me. I remember exactly when things shifted. It was a gray Tuesday in January. Rain was tapping against the office windows downtown. I was at my desk, going over quarterly expenses. Officially, my title was Vice President at Stratton Dynamics, but functionally, I was the CFO. Gavin didn't like how intimidating that sounded coming from a woman. While scanning the reports, a $12,000 Van Cleef & Arpels charge jumped out at me. No notes, no explanation, no business reason. It didn't fit. My birthday had already passed, Christmas was a distant memory, and our anniversary was still months away, so I casually brought it up over dinner that night. Gavin didn't miss a beat. Too fast, too smooth. Client appreciation gift for the Hendersons. "Elise loves Van Cleef & Arpels." I smiled and nodded, pretending to buy it. The next day, I called Elise Carlisle myself, acting like I'd seen her new piece and wanted one just like it. Her total confusion told me everything I needed to know. That night, while Gavin was in the shower, I logged into his email. He hadn't changed his password in years. Lenababy 2004, the year we got married. The man built a tech empire but couldn't bother with basic password hygiene. There it was, a receipt from Van Cleef & Arpels, followed by an email thread between Gavin and my executive assistant, Alyssa Caldwell. "She'll love it," Alyssa had written. "Almost as much as I love what you got me last month." Their messages were intimate. Grossly so. Alyssa, 28, sharp, driven, ambitious. I had hired her myself, mentored her, sat with her over takeout while planning marketing campaigns and long-term strategy. All the while she was sleeping with my husband. A car horn outside snapped me back to the moment. Gavin was already downstairs, probably getting annoyed. I gave myself one last look in the mirror, grabbed the clutch with the USB, and straightened my spine. "Showtime," I whispered to myself. "Reservations are at 8, Lena." Gavin called up the stairs. "Don't want to be late." The irony nearly made me laugh. This from the man who was always late to everything that mattered. School plays, family dinners, doctor's appointments. But tonight, suddenly punctual. He'd booked Lahar Din's private dining room, the most exclusive spot in the city. What he didn't know was that I'd already called ahead and made some adjustments. The space wasn't just for us anymore. I'd had them add a few more tables. Seated at those were not random diners, but carefully chosen guests, old friends, respected colleagues, and 2 business journalists from the Tribune. People whose opinions Gavin actually cared about. The drive downtown was filled with empty chatter. Gavin was in high spirits, practically glowing. He complimented my dress, going a little over the top, which might have flattered me once. Now it felt rehearsed. Just another one of his performances. "You really pulled out all the stops," I said, gazing out at the lights of Boston. Le Jardin on a Friday? Must have taken some favors. "Only the best for our 20th, he said, reaching over to take my hand. I let him. Noticed how his thumb brushed over my bare wrist. "I've got something special for you," he added. "Something fit for the woman behind the man." The phrase made my stomach twist. Behind the man. As if I'd been tagging along for 2 decades instead of co-running the damn company. As if it wasn't my MBA, my number crunching, and my strategic calls that had saved Stratton Dynamics during the last recession, while he was out wining and dining so-called clients. The restaurant was all warm gold light and quiet elegance, crystal chandeliers, and the soft flicker of candlelight. The maitre d' welcomed us with a smile and led us into the private room, now filled with familiar faces. Gavin blinked at the new setup, slightly confused, but ever the showman, he recovered fast. "Mr. Whitmore," Antonio, our regular waiter, said as he appeared beside our table. "And the lovely Mrs. Whitmore. Happy anniversary to you both." We raised our glasses. Gavin dove right into his usual story. How we'd met in college, how I'd believed in his vision when no one else did. The well-worn tale he always told to make himself look like the dreamer, and me, the loyal support. No mention, of course, of how it was my family's investment that got Stratton Dynamics off the ground, or how my industry contacts landed us our first major deals. I nodded along, playing the role I'd perfected, until I felt it. A shift in the room. Gavin's gaze moved past me. His eyes widened just a hair before he masked it with a fake smile. I didn't have to turn around to know who had just walked in. Alyssa. She glided over in a black designer dress that probably cost more than she made in a month. But it wasn't her overpriced dress that caught my eye. It was the diamond tennis bracelet sparkling on her wrist. My bracelet. The exact one I had stopped to admire in a Van Cleef & Arpels window 6 months ago, while out shopping with Gavin. I'd pointed it out, not thinking much of it at the time. "Guess I should've." "Surprise, darling," she said with that smug little grin, locking eyes with me like she expected a full meltdown. A dramatic scene, some tears, maybe even a drink thrown across the table. She wanted me to fall apart in front of everyone, but instead of unraveling, I felt this strange calm settle over me. Everything had clicked into place. I had a hunch she might show tonight. The hotel reservation made under Gavin's name just a few blocks from the restaurant? That was a big clue. But the bracelet? That was a bonus. "Alyssa," I said coolly, giving her a small nod. "Well, this is unexpected. I don't recall seeing your name on the reservation." Gavin jumped in so fast it was almost comical. His voice had that nervous edge to it, a half-pitch too high. "Alyssa was just dropping off some documents for Monday's meeting. Right, Alyssa?" I watched her confidence slip, her smile faltering just a bit. This wasn't going according to her little script. "That bracelet is gorgeous," I continued, my voice steady and loud enough for the room to hear. "Van Cleef & Arpels, isn't it? Looks exactly like the one I fell in love with last winter." She instinctively moved her hand to cover it, like that would undo what we all knew. Gavin, meanwhile, looked like the blood had completely drained from his face. I reached into my clutch slowly, deliberately, and pulled out the small black USB drive. "Set it down right in the center of the table. The prenup has an infidelity clause," I said clearly, letting each word hang in the air. "And I've got proof, not just of this little fling, but of 3 others before it." I paused, letting that land before adding, "Oh, and something much more interesting hidden in the company's books." I turned my attention to the people at the surrounding table. Colleagues, journalists, investors. Anyone curious about Stratton Dynamics' shadow accounts? Or would you rather wait for the SEC to break the news? Gavin went from pale to downright ashen. The silence in that golden-lit dining room was thick, almost humming. The servers froze mid-step. Everyone was listening now. I watched as the carefully constructed mask Gavin wore, the charming CEO, the loving husband, started to crack. His eyes were wild, mouth opening slightly like he was going to speak, then closing again. It was all falling apart. 20 years of marriage flashed through my mind. Not just the infidelity, but the erosion. the tiny chips at the foundation we'd built together. It wasn't just this moment. It was everything that led up to it. "Lena, please," he finally whispered, reaching for my hand across the table. "Let's talk about this in private." I pulled my hand away and felt myself drift back in time. Columbia University, 2003. I was 22, graduating summa cum laude with an economics degree and 3 job offers from top-tier investment banks. Gavin was the smooth-talking business major with grand ideas and average grades. But when he spoke about tech startups, you couldn't help but believe in him. When he proposed that summer, I shelved my Bay Street plans and threw my weight behind his vision. "You're the brains, Lena Berry," he used to say, laughing as we huddled over business plans at our tiny kitchen table. "I'm just the pretty face who'll sell it." Back then, it was a joke. Eventually, it became the truth. "There's nothing left to discuss," I said, my voice sharp, cold. Alyssa had sunk into a chair nearby, her earlier confidence shrinking by the second. "The time for discussion was before you handed my anniversary gift to my executive assistant," I said. The irony didn't escape me. Alyssa was, in many ways, a younger version of myself. Ambitious, intelligent, eager to make her mark. I saw all that in her when I hired her. What I didn't see coming was that she'd try to step into every part of my life, like some twisted upgrade. "Stratton Dynamics exists because of my family's investment," I continued, locking eyes with Gavin. "It was my father's contacts that secured our first few clients. My background in economics that built the structure keeping the company afloat when the 2011 crash hit." I spotted Elliot Graves from the Boston Financial Tribune scribbling away at his notepad. "Good. Let the record reflect exactly how this empire was built." Over the years, I had become the operational backbone of the company. While Gavin schmoozed with clients and buttered up investors, I created the models that kept us profitable. I overhauled entire departments, introduced the data analytics division that now drives 60% of our revenue. "Remember the Peterson acquisition?" I asked the room, though my eyes never left Gavin. "The one that got us national attention?" His jaw clenched. He knew where I was headed. I spent 6 months breaking down their numbers, finding every soft spot. I built the acquisition plan from the ground up. But when the media called, who got the spotlight? Who posed for the Tech Innovators cover? Who accepted the award? "Lena, you never wanted the spotlight," he said, his voice trembling, the edge of panic finally breaking through. "No," I said, calm and clear. "I was told the spotlight wasn't for me, that clients preferred the face of a man, that investors would feel more secure." Then I turned to Alyssa. "Is that what he told you too? That you'd be the one running things quietly, making him look brilliant from the background?" The flicker of guilt in her eyes gave me the answer I already knew. My stomach turned as I remembered the exact moment it all clicked. 3 months ago, I'd overheard Gavin on a call in his home office. I was walking past when I caught it. "Once Lena's out of the picture, we'll restructure the team," he said. "You've already proven you can handle her role." I froze right there in the hallway, hand over my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. "The board trust me. They'll go along with whatever story we give them." The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with Simone Caldwell, the sharpest divorce attorney in Boston. She read over our prenup with a smile. "You're in a stronger position than you think," Simone said, flipping through the pages. "There's an infidelity clause Gavin probably forgot about. His father insisted on it, ironically, to keep gold diggers away." I remember laughing at that. That man never did see me for who I really was. "The clause gives you 50% of all marital assets," Simone went on, "plus an additional 10% of the company's value for every confirmed affair. With the right evidence, you could walk away with majority control of Stratton Dynamics." That meeting changed everything. I stopped being the heartbroken wife and started playing a smarter game. I smiled through dinners, held his hand in public, and all the while, I was gathering ammo. I hired Caleb Jennings, a former FBI forensic accountant turned private investigator. He didn't just confirm Alyssa, he found 3 others before her. But worse than the affairs were the numbers. Offshore accounts. There were shady transfers, client funds that had been borrowed temporarily, then quietly replaced right before quarterly audits rolled around. "Mrs. Whitmore," our waiter Antonio said gently as he approached our table, snapping me out of my thoughts. "Would you like me to escort Miss Caldwell out?" Before I could even respond, Alyssa shot up from her seat. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Gavin, tell her the truth. About us. About the company plans." Company plans? I repeated, one eyebrow raised. Oh, you mean the restructuring where I magically disappear? Or maybe you're talking about the presentation slides where you take credit for the analytics framework I spent years developing? Her face dropped. Weeks earlier, I'd combed through Gavin's cloud storage, drafts of presentations meant for shareholders. And sure enough, Alyssa's name was plastered all over the slides where my work should have been. She wasn't just sleeping with my husband, she was rewriting history, and that, more than anything else, was the true betrayal. Not even the lies. It was the professional erasure. 20 years of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights, vanishing with a keystroke. Lena, Gavin said, voice softening into a whisper, desperate now. Think about what you're doing. This company, it's our legacy. No, I said, rising from my chair and facing the room. Stratton Dynamics was built on my ideas, my strategy, and my willingness to let someone else shine while I stayed in the background. That era ends tonight. I turned toward Elliot Graves, the journalist. I have full documentation of financial misconduct at Stratton Dynamics, I announced. It was orchestrated by our CEO, Gavin Whitmore. I'm ready to hand over everything to the authorities. Gavin went gray. Not pale, gray. He knew exactly what I'd uncovered. You wouldn't, he muttered. Those were temporary solutions. Nothing permanent. Everything was returned. Just like I was going to be replaced? I said, quieter now. That kind of quiet that demands attention. You built this empire on shifting sand, Gavin. And tonight, the tides come in. A hush swept across the room. Even the clinking of cutlery had stopped. The USB drive still sat on the table like a ticking bomb. Small, black, and deadly. You've made your point, Gavin said finally, voice tight and tinged with frustration. Let's go somewhere private and talk this through. I shook my head slowly. Privacy's worked in your favor for too long. As I stood there, I couldn't help thinking back to the car ride over. He'd been in unusually good spirits. His hand rested on my knee, his voice warm as he pointed out a new high-rise going up, one of our clients' projects. 20 years, he'd said with a fond smile. Remember our first anniversary? That little Italian spot in Cambridge? We could barely afford a bottle of wine. Of course I remembered. I wore a dress I'd saved for months to buy. Gavin had surprised me with a silver bracelet engraved with our initials. We drank cheap Chianti and made big plans. The best is yet to come, Lena, he'd said tonight in the car. I'd smiled back, checked my lipstick in the visor mirror, and silently rehearsed the steps I'd been preparing for weeks. Le Jardin had been the ideal stage, not just for its exclusivity, but because I'd planned every detail myself. 3 weeks earlier, I'd called the owner, Roland. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, your husband booked the small private room for your anniversary. I'd like something a bit more open, I told him. The larger private room, a few extra tables, but Mr. Whitmore specifically requested privacy. It's my anniversary too, Roland, I said gently, and I have a surprise that requires an audience. A generous donation to Roland's favorite charity sealed the deal. The guest list? Just as calculated. Daniel and Vanessa Prescott, our closest friends, and longtime skeptics of Gavin's behavior. Stephen Carlyle, our biggest investor. Elliot Graves, who'd been chasing a scoop on tech finance ethics. And Camille Winters, senior partner at Kensington Capital, who'd been gently courting me for months. Now, as Gavin realized how much ground he'd lost, I saw his expression shift. His panic cooled, replaced by calculation. I recognized it well. It was his boardroom face, the one he wore when he was about to pitch damage control. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, offering a strained chuckle. I apologize for that awkward moment. My wife is understandably upset. Some personal matters have gotten tangled up with business, and is that why you asked me to compile documentation for the SEC? I said sharply, cutting him off. Just a personal matter? His smile froze. 2 weeks ago, I'd casually mentioned some inconsistencies that might raise eyebrows with the SEC, just to see his reaction. He brushed it off. He had no idea I was the anonymous tipster who had already flagged those issues to the regulators. Lena, you're making very serious claims, he said, throwing a nervous glance at Stephen Carlyle, who sat stiffly, arms crossed. Carlyle's firm controlled 20% of Whitmore stock. Then maybe we should go over the context together, I said, picking up the USB drive and turning to the group. 4 years ago, Gavin approved the use of client development funds to cover a real estate purchase. Personal. The money was paid back before the quarter closed, but the transaction logs weren't properly scrubbed. Stephen's jaw tightened. Is that true, Whitmore? Gavin opened his mouth, but before he could say a word, Alyssa spoke. Lena, please, she blurted out. This isn't about the company. It's about your jealousy. I laughed. And not a polite laugh. A real, amused, you have no idea laugh. Jealousy? I said, shaking my head. Alyssa, do you really think you're the first? I turned to the others. This drive holds proof of Gavin's affair with Natalie from marketing in 2019, Erica from our Seattle branch in 2021. And let's not forget the pharmaceutical representative he spent a weekend with in San Diego, the one whose name he never even bothered to learn. Then I looked directly at Gavin. Did you ever tell Alyssa about the prenup clause? The one that says every verified affair costs you another 10% of the company? His expression told me all I needed to know. Either he'd forgotten, or he never read it carefully in the first place. His father had insisted on that clause to protect the family fortune from some supposed gold-digging wife. And now? That same clause was going to hand me controlling interest in the company he thought he owned. The irony couldn't have been more delicious. 3 weeks ago, I'd met Camille for lunch under the guise of discussing investment opportunities. What I'd really been doing was lining up my next chapter. Just in case. This is insanity, Gavin said, louder now. Lena's clearly having some kind of breakdown. Alyssa is just my assistant. This is all. It's paranoid. Save it, Dom, Daniel Prescott said, stepping forward to stand beside me. His wife, Vanessa, joined him and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. We've known for years, Daniel said. Vanessa saw you with that marketing girl at the 2019 holiday party. And I saw you with Alyssa at the Belmont in April, Vanessa added, her voice soft but firm. I blinked. You knew? And you didn't tell me? Vanessa gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. We tried to, Lena, subtly, but you always changed the subject. We figured either you already knew and were handling it your way, or you weren't ready to hear it yet. I let out a shaky breath. I didn't want to know, I said, quieter than before, not until it was impossible to ignore. That hit harder than I'd expected. All those extra invitations for girls' nights, the long, careful glances. They'd seen the truth before I'd let myself see it. They'd been waiting, quietly, until I was ready to face it. Gavin's face flushed deep red now. His jaw was tight, his nostrils flared. I recognized the warning sign. He was close to losing control. He'd always kept a lid on his temper in public, but I'd seen the real thing behind closed doors. This is a setup, he growled. A coordinated ambush. You've all been planning this behind my back. You think you can push me out of my own company? Your company, came a voice from nearby. It was Elliot Graves. He'd been quietly scribbling notes throughout the chaos, but now he looked up, sharp interest in his eyes. Wasn't Stratton Dynamics started with Mrs. Whitmore family's capital? He asked. And isn't she listed as co-founder on the original incorporation papers? I hadn't prompted him, but if I'd had a glass of champagne in my hand, I might have toasted him right then and there. The narrative was slipping further out of Gavin's control, unraveling faster than I'd even hoped. Suddenly, Alyssa stood. Her bracelet caught the chandelier light as she pushed her chair back. I should go, she murmured, not making eye contact with anyone. Sit down, Gavin barked, his mask cracking. This isn't over. For me it is, she replied, and for a moment there was strength behind the tears. You told me Lena didn't understand the business, that she was just a figurehead. You said she'd take the settlement and disappear. The murmurs started again, louder this time. People exchanging glances, whispers of, "Did you hear that?" And, "Unbelievable." Gavin looked like he was about to explode. But I was already reaching for my phone, calm, steady, dialing the number I'd memorized weeks ago. The entire restaurant held its breath as I tapped the screen and put the call on speaker. Monroe and Blake LLP, came the crisp, professional voice of my attorneys. This is Lena Whitmore, I said, my tone steady, unhurried. Go ahead and proceed with the filings we discussed. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore, the documents are ready. We'll file everything electronically within the hour. The temporary restraining order on company assets will be active by morning. I ended the call and looked straight at Gavin. His eyes searched mine, maybe for mercy, maybe for a rewind button. That was just the first step, I told him, calm as ever. The divorce filing cites the infidelity clause in our prenup. The corporate filing includes my intellectual property claims, the analytics framework, the client system, and the acquisition strategy model I developed, all of which your company materials currently credit to you. Gavin's face flickered from furious to frightened. You can't prove any of that was yours. Oh, but I can, I said, feeling something like fresh air rush through me. Freedom. I've kept everything. The early drafts, the handwritten notebooks, the emails where you asked me to break it down so you could regurgitate it in meeting. 2 decades worth of receipts, Gavin. I turned to Stephen Carlyle, who'd been listening intently. The analytics model that boosted client retention by 43% last year? I said. Mine. The acquisition strategy that got us data access for half their market value? Also mine. The financial restructuring that kept us afloat during the 2011 crash? You guessed it. Me again. Stephen raised his eyebrows, clearly doing the math in his head. Is that true, Gavin? Gavin didn't answer. He didn't need to. Daniel Prescott exhaled slowly and shook his head. The board has to be informed, Dom. About all of it. I'll schedule an emergency meeting first thing tomorrow, Stephen added, slipping effortlessly into investor mode. I stood, gathering my clutch and slipping the USB drive inside. My 45 minutes are up, I said, looking around the room, no longer just a woman confronting betrayal, but a founder reclaiming her name. I think I've made my position clear. I turned toward the room, letting my voice rise just enough to carry. This isn't just about my share of Stratton dynamics. This is about what was always mine, the work I did, the legacy I helped build, and I'm not stepping aside quietly. Then I looked back at Gavin, one last time. I slid my wedding ring off my finger and set it gently beside the overturned water glass. Happy anniversary. And with that, I walked out of Le Jardin, head high, heart steady. I felt every eye follow me to the door. The night air hit me like a fresh start. Cool, clean, full of possibility. I hadn't realized just how heavy that burden had been until I set it down. For the first time in years, I felt light. I heard Gavin call after me, his voice thick with panic, but I didn't turn around. My driver, Marcus, stood waiting at the curb like clockwork. He opened the car door as I approached, his concern showing. Everything okay, Mrs. Whitmore? Better than okay, I said as I slid into the back seat. Take me to the Fairmont, please. I'd reserved a suite 2 days ago, knowing tonight would be a one-way trip. I wasn't going back to the penthouse. As Marcus pulled away from the curb, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Calls, texts, dozens of them. The news had already begun to travel, and fast. I glanced at the screen. Board members, business partners, old friends. I silenced the phone, needing a little peace after the storm. By morning, the Boston business world was on fire. Elliot Graves's article in the Business Journal dropped at 8 a.m. It was fair, but lethal, outlining serious allegations of corporate misconduct and intellectual property theft inside Stratton Dynamics. When I finally checked my phone, I had over 50 messages. I only returned 3. Stephen Carlyle, Camille Winters, Simone Caldwell. The board has scheduled an emergency meeting for noon, Stephen told me. Gavin's scrambling. He's calling it a personal vendetta. But the documentation you provided? It's airtight. You'll be there? I asked, staring out over the skyline from my suite. Wouldn't miss it, he said. And Lena? Just between us, I always knew you were the brains behind the curtain. Simone confirmed everything on the legal front. The restraining order had gone through, freezing all company assets. Gavin was legally barred from making any significant moves without full board approval. The divorce papers were filed, signed, sealed, and already causing tremors. The gears of justice were grinding into motion. I spent the rest of the morning calling key clients and strategic partners. These were people I'd built relationships with over years, quietly managing expectations, delivering results, and cleaning up after Gavin's overpromises. Most had already heard his version of events. His assistant had been dialing up damage control since sunrise. Lena, Gavin says you're having some kind of breakdown, said Harrison Boyd, our oldest and most valuable client. His tone was cautious. Harrison, I said evenly, you've known me for 15 years. Have I ever struck you as irrational? There was a pause. No, he admitted. You've always been the one with your feet on the ground. Then ask yourself, I said gently, why he's calling me unstable, instead of answering the accusation. By noon, I had the support of our 3 largest clients, who together accounted for nearly 40% of our annual revenue. They weren't going anywhere. Not because of Gavin, not because of rumors. The board meeting, which I joined virtually, was swift and brutal. There wasn't much room for debate. Once Simone presented the evidence, unauthorized fund transfers, buried financial records, and emails connecting the dots, the outcome was inevitable. The vote came quickly. Gavin was placed on administrative leave, pending a full internal investigation. I was named interim CEO. That evening, I returned to the penthouse, not out of nostalgia, just to grab a few personal things. Gavin was there, waiting. He looked nothing like the polished executive the world was used to seeing. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, hair a mess. For once, his carefully curated image matched the chaos he'd created. "You've destroyed everything," he rasped as I stepped inside. 20 years of marriage, for what? Revenge? I set my bag down slowly, taking in the space around me. The marble counters gleamed, the custom furniture sat in curated perfection. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows still took my breath away, even now. It was our golden cage, beautiful, cold. "This wasn't revenge, Gavin," I said. "This was justice." "They've suspended me," he muttered, as if I hadn't been the one who set that in motion. "My own company." "Our company," I corrected. "And yes, I was there." He stared at me like he was seeing someone entirely new. Or maybe seeing the woman I'd always been, finally standing in full light. "How long?" he asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "Since the day I overheard you tell Alyssa I'd be out of the picture soon," I said quietly. "But really, the seeds were planted long before that. When you decided I was replaceable, when you started claiming credit for my work. When the affairs started," Gavin sank onto the couch like his legs gave out. He buried his face in his hands. "I never thought you'd fight back. You were always so accommodating." I moved slowly around the room, collecting photos, little keepsakes, things that still meant something, even now. "That was my mistake," I said. "I let myself believe that comfort could make up for being sidelined. That money, success, the title on the door would somehow compensate for being lonely in my own marriage." I paused at a photo from the early days, us smiling so wide it hurt to look at. We were young, hopeful, in love once. "You want to know what the saddest part is?" I asked, not expecting an answer. "I loved you. I really did. Even when I started suspecting things, I kept trying to make excuses for. But it wasn't until you planned to push me out of the company that the fog finally cleared." "I never meant to hurt you," he said, and even he didn't sound convinced by it. "Yes, you did," I replied gently. "Maybe not in the beginning, but at some point, hurting me became a side effect you could live with. That's worse, Gavin. That's worse." I kept gathering my things. I could feel him watching me, like he was seeing the life we built slip through his fingers. The penthouse suddenly felt less like a home and more like a stage set. Picture perfect, but empty underneath. "So, what happens now?" he asked finally, his voice small. "I rebuild," I said. "The company. My life. Everything." He stood slowly, took a hesitant step toward me. "We could fix this, Lena," he said. "The board, the business, us. Let me try. Let me make it right." For a split second, I saw a flicker of the man I used to love, the one I said yes to all those years ago. But that man was long gone. What remained was someone who still didn't fully grasp the damage he'd done. "Goodbye, Gavin." I walked out without looking back, and as I stepped into the hallway, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sorrow, yes, but also something that felt like release. Vindication. Sadness. Strength. That penthouse, once a symbol of everything I thought we'd achieved, would now serve as Gavin's prison, walls echoing with lawsuits, board inquiries, and the slow collapse of everything he thought he controlled. It wasn't a clean victory, but real life rarely offers those. 2 days later, I sat in my new office at Stratton Dynamics, though not for long. I was reviewing the rebranding proposal, flipping through mock-ups and name concepts. The company would be renamed Novametrics after my grandmother, the one who gave me that initial investment years ago, when no one else believed in us. The new logo? A rising sun. A symbol of beginnings, not endings. I signed the authorization forms, then glanced at my left hand. My ring finger was bare now, but I didn't miss the weight. I'd worn that ring like armor for 2 decades. Now, it was gone. And so was the version of me who accepted being second to anyone. I hadn't just reclaimed a company, I had reclaimed myself. The door to the cage had always been there. I just hadn't realized I held the key. Now I was free.